The segment began with laughter, but it did not stay there. At first, the studio audience thought they knew what kind of moment was coming. A clip of Donald Trump filled the screen, reaching backward toward Barack Obama again, trying to turn an old rivalry into a new distraction. Trump talked about weakness, Iran, bad deals, failed leadership, cash payments, and the familiar claim that only he understood strength. His voice carried that same certainty, that same rhythm, that same belief that if he said something loudly enough, the room would accept it as proof. The audience laughed at first because the pattern was familiar. Trump had done this many times before. He would name Obama, blame Obama, attack Obama, and then place himself beside the attack as the only strong alternative. It was a political habit by now. If something was complicated, make it personal. If a crisis had history, reduce it to one enemy. If policy was messy, turn it into a story about who looked tough on television. Then the screen changed. Obama appeared, calm, steady, measured. He was not speaking as if he needed to win a shouting match. He was not trying to outperform Trump. He was not rushing toward a punchline. He spoke with the kind of control that made the room lean forward instead of jump back. He said America was already great, already strong, and that its greatness did not depend on Donald Trump, Barack Obama, or any one person. The studio went quiet immediately. That was the contrast. Trump's argument was built around one man. Obama's answer was built around the country. Trump wanted every crisis to prove his own importance. Obama reminded people that democracy is stronger than one personality, one campaign, one grievance, or one man demanding applause. Trump spoke as if the nation was fragile unless he was praised. Obama spoke as if the nation had deeper roots than any politician standing under lights. That difference changed the whole segment. The host let the clip breathe. No joke came right away. No cutaway. No silly graphic, just a few seconds of silence while the audience processed what they had heard. Then the host leaned forward and said, "That sentence was more damaging than any insult." The audience clapped softly because it was true. Obama had not called Trump weak. He had not mocked his hair, his rallies, his posts, or his strange habit of turning every world event into a personal review. He had simply removed the emotional hook Trump depends on. Trump often speaks as if America is broken unless he is obeyed, weak unless he is praised, humiliated unless he is attacking somebody, unsafe unless he is at the center. Obama rejected that entire frame in one sentence. America is already strong. That was the first hit. Not loud, not cruel, but powerful. Because once that sentence entered the room, Trump's whole performance had to stand beside it. His warnings sounded less like leadership and more like dependency. His claims of strength sounded less like confidence and more like a demand that the nation borrow its courage from his ego. The audience understood that instinctively. Then came the Iran comparison. The segment played older clips of Trump warning that weak leadership could push America into conflict. It showed him attacking Obama's Iran deal as a disaster, a surrender, a humiliation, a symbol of weakness. It showed Trump using Iran not as a complicated foreign policy issue, but as a political weapon, a way to say Obama was soft and he was strong. Then the segment placed that old standard beside Trump himself. The room began to understand the point. Trump had spent years using Iran to measure other people. Now the measuring stick was being turned back toward him. That is always the risk of political boasting. A man can spend years creating standards for his enemies, but one day the country may ask whether he can survive the standard himself. Trump had used the language of strength for years. He had said America needed toughness, dominance, fear, and a leader who could not be pushed around. But when tensions rose, when the stakes became real, when soldiers, allies, markets, families, and foreign capitals had to read every word carefully, the old rally language sounded different. It no longer sounded like prophecy. It sounded like a standard he had created for someone else and now had to stand beside himself. Obama did not attack him personally. That made the moment sharper. He spoke about leadership as responsibility, not performance. He said strength is not the ability to sound tough during a rally. Strength is the discipline to protect lives when the stakes are real. Strength is respecting allies, telling citizens the truth, and understanding that war talk is not entertainment for a cheering crowd. The audience stopped laughing. For older viewers watching at home, that message carried weight. They remembered presidents who chose words carefully because words could move markets, soldiers, families, and allies. They remembered a time when leaders knew that a careless sentence about war was not just a soundbite. It could become a signal. It could calm or inflame. It could reassure or terrify. It could tell allies whether America was steady or unpredictable. They knew toughness was not always loud. Sometimes toughness meant restraint. Sometimes toughness meant patience. Sometimes toughness meant refusing to turn fear into applause. Obama gave that instinct a voice. He said, "There's a kind of strength that does not need to announce itself every 5 minutes." The room applauded. He continued, "There is a kind of leadership that does not confuse attention with achievement. There is a kind of courage that knows the difference between protecting the country and protecting your own image." That line landed hard, because it named the difference between two styles of power. Trump often turned strength into a performance, a look, a phrase, a threat, a claim, a reaction that could be clipped and shared. Obama was describing strength as discipline under pressure. Not what you say when people are cheering, but what you decide when the room is quiet and the consequences are real. The host paused the clip. "That," he said, "is why this got under Trump's skin." The audience laughed softly, because Trump wanted the argument to be, who sounds tougher? Obama changed it to, who understands the cost? The applause came again. That was the second hit. Trump's strongest position had always been emotional. He wanted to own the feeling of strength. He wanted to make rivals look weak before details entered the room. But Obama moved the discussion from emotion to consequence. What happens after the tough line? What happens after the applause? What happens when the aircraft move? When soldiers wait for orders? When families watch news alerts? When allies try to understand whether America is calm or theatrical? That is where leadership is tested, not in the roar. In the aftermath, Obama said it plainly. Anybody can sound strong for 30 seconds. The question is whether people are safer 30 days later. The studio went still. That sentence changed the scale again. Trump had often measured strength by dominance in the moment. Obama measured it by safety over time. The audience could feel the difference. Then the segment shifted to Trump's reaction. The screen showed the familiar pattern. Anger at the media, attacks on Obama, claims that he had done more than anyone, complaints that people refused to give him credit, repeated insistence that his instincts were unmatched, and the suggestion that critics simply could not understand his greatness. The more Trump fired back, the more Obama's calm line seemed to grow. Trump wanted the fight to be personal. Obama made it constitutional. That was the third hit. The host looked into the camera and said, Obama did not take the bait because the bait was the whole trap. The audience clapped. Trump wanted the conversation to become Obama versus Trump. He wanted the crowd to compare personalities. Who was tougher? Who was stronger? Who spoke louder? Who looked more dominant? Who could deliver the sharper attack? Obama refused that frame. He spoke about democracy. And the tone changed completely. He said public office is service, not revenge. The Constitution is not a prop for one man's mood. Institutions are not enemies because they limit power. Critics are not traitors because they ask questions. A democracy survives when leaders understand that the office is bigger than the person holding it. Nobody laughed now. That was where the segment landed hardest. Because Obama had moved the conversation away from Trump's favorite arena, he had left the wrestling ring and walked into a civic classroom. He reminded people that the presidency is not a personal possession. It is not a stage built for one man's grievances. It is not a microphone for revenge. It is a temporary trust handed to a citizen by other citizens. The office is bigger than the person. That idea was devastating to Trump's style, because Trump's political language often collapses the difference between himself and the country. If he is attacked, America is attacked. If he is criticized, the people are criticized. If he loses, the system is corrupt. If he is denied praise, the nation is ungrateful. If he is absent, America is doomed. Obama's argument broke that spell. America is not one man. America is laws, voters, workers, teachers, soldiers, courts, families, institutions, traditions, corrections, arguments, elections, and the peaceful transfer of power. America is the people who keep showing up even when politics becomes ugly. America is not a personality cult. It is a shared responsibility. Obama said greatness is not a slogan one man owns. It is a responsibility millions share. The audience applauded slowly. That line carried a different kind of power. It was not designed for a quick laugh. It was designed to stay with people, for seniors watching at home, for veterans, for parents, for teachers, for people who had seen presidents come and go. It reminded them of something basic. Leaders are temporary, but the country is not supposed to be. The host let the line breathe. Then he said, that is the difference between leadership and grievance. The audience clapped. Leadership asks, what does the country need? Grievance asks, why was I not praised? Leadership looks at institutions and asks how they can serve the public. Grievance looks at institutions and asks whether they are loyal to one man. Leadership takes criticism as part of public office. Grievance treats criticism as betrayal. Leadership knows the country can survive disagreement. Grievance says disagreement proves the country is broken. Obama did not need to say all of that at once. The contrast said it for. Then came the line that froze the room. Obama looked into the camera and said, if your strength depends on making everyone afraid of your absence, then what you are defending is not America. It is your own importance. The studio went silent. Not quiet, silent. The kind of silence that happens when a sentence names something people have felt for a long time but have not heard said so clearly. Then the applause rose, slow at first, then louder, then sustained. That line worked because it named the emotional center of Trump's political message. Trump often speaks as if disaster waits right outside the door unless he personally stands in the way. He tells supporters that only he can stop collapse. Only he can save the nation. Only he can defeat enemies. Only he can protect them. Only he can make the world respect America. The message creates dependence. Obama's line challenged that dependence. A strong democracy should not require fear of one man's absence. A strong country should not need a single personality to feel secure. A real leader should make institutions stronger, not make people believe everything falls apart without him. That was the heart of the segment. The audience understood it. The host leaned back and said, that line is going to bother him for a while. The audience laughed, but lightly, because everyone knew why. It hit the one place Trump's performance rarely allows anyone to touch, the difference between loving the country and loving the idea that the country needs you more than anyone else. Obama continued in the clip. He spoke about laws, limits, peaceful transfer, free press, independent courts, the duty to tell the truth when people are afraid, the need for leaders who understand that criticism is not treason, and that power without accountability becomes something dangerous. He did not mention Trump in every sentence. He did not need to. The shape of the argument was already clear. The host paused again and said, notice what Obama is doing. He is not trying to prove he is more important than Trump. He is trying to prove the country is more important than both of them. That line drew applause. It captured the entire contrast. Trump's style often says, "Look at me." Obama's answer said, "Look at the system." Trump's style says, "Without me, everything fails." Obama's answer said, "If the system depends on one man, it is already in danger." Trump's style says, "My enemies are America's enemies." Obama's answer said, "In a democracy, your critics are still citizens." The room began to feel the weight of it. This was not merely a late-night roast. It was a civic argument disguised as a television segment. The host brought the Iran comparison back one more time. He reminded viewers that foreign policy cannot be reduced to a contest of who sounds toughest. Iran, war, nuclear agreements, sanctions, allies, diplomacy, military risk. These are not props for applause line. They are matters of life and death. Families send sons and daughters into uniform. Allies watch for signals. Adversaries test boundaries. Markets move. Communities worry. A leader who treats that stage like a rally is not being strong. He is being careless. Obama's answer was rooted in that seriousness. He said strength requires discipline because undisciplined strength becomes danger. It requires knowledge because ignorance with power becomes chaos. It requires humility because no president, no matter how confident, can understand the world alone. That line stood out. No president can understand the world alone. The audience applauded again because the sentence pushed back against the entire one-man myth. Leadership is not solitary brilliance. It is judgment supported by listening. It is knowing which voices to bring into the room. It is being strong enough to admit that experts know things. It is being secure enough to learn. Trump had often framed himself as the source of the answer. Obama framed the president as a steward of a process bigger than himself. That difference was the real story. Then the host added humor again, carefully. Trump talks about leadership like it is an episode of The Apprentice, he said. He looks at the world and thinks, "Who do I fire?" Obama looks at the world and thinks, "Who do I consult before people get hurt?" The audience laughed and clapped. The old clip played again, with Obama joking that Trump had recognized the real problem on The Apprentice was leadership and had fired Gary Busey. The room laughed because the line was funny, but the joke carried a warning. Reality television rewards dramatic decisions. Government punishes reckless ones. On a show, firing someone creates an episode. In the real world, firing experts, alienating allies, or ignoring warnings can create consequences that last for years. Obama had once mocked that difference lightly. Now it sounded more serious. The host said, "These are the kind of decisions that would keep him up at night." The audience laughed again. But then the room settled, because the deeper point remained. Leadership is not a performance of dominance. It is the burden of consequence. Obama's calm made that burden visible. He said a president must know that words have weight. When a president speaks, families listen, markets listen, soldiers listen, foreign leaders listen, enemies listen. The point is not to sound strong for the cameras. The point is to understand that a president's words do not disappear when the applause ends. That is why restraint matters. That is why truth matters. That is why humility matters. The host turned to the audience. For some people, restraint looks like weakness because they confuse leadership with spectacle. He paused. But restraint can be the strongest thing in the room when the alternative is chaos. The applause was long and steady. Then the segment moved toward the final argument. Trump had tried to make Obama the subject. Obama made America the subject. Trump had tried to revive an old rivalry. Obama made the presidency itself the issue. Trump had tried to make strength sound like personal dominance. Obama made strength sound like public responsibility. That was why the contrast worked. It was not nostalgia. It was not simply that Obama sounded calmer or more polished. It was that he offered a different definition of power. Power, in Obama's frame, was not the ability to demand loyalty. It was the responsibility to serve people who may never praise you. Power was not freedom from criticism. It was accountability to criticism. Power was not revenge. It was restraint. The host said, "The Constitution is not a mood ring." The audience laughed. "It does not change color every time the president feels disrespected." The room exploded. Then he added, "And institutions are not enemies because they say no." The applause returned quickly. That was the Democratic point. Limits do not weaken the presidency. They protect the country. Courts, Congress, journalists, inspectors, voters, state officials, civil servants, and constitutional rules are not obstacles to greatness. They are the guardrails that keep personal power from becoming national danger. Obama's answer reminded people of that. Trump's response, by contrast, kept returning to himself, his achievements, his treatment, his enemies, his credit, his strength, his insults, his need to prove that every criticism was actually unfairness and every disagreement was actually weakness. The more he reacted, the smaller Obama's calm seemed to make him. That is the strange power of restraint. Noise fills the room. Restraint changes the room. By the end of the segment, the audience was no longer laughing at a single Trump clip. They were watching two ideas of America stand beside each other. One idea said the country is weak unless one man dominates. The other said the country is strong because no one man owns it. One idea said leadership means making people afraid of what happens without you. The other said leadership means building something that lasts after you leave. One idea said critics are enemies. The other said critics are part of the republic. One idea said greatness belongs to the man at the microphone. The other said greatness belongs to the people who keep the country alive. The host looked into the camera for the closing stretch. Trump wanted to make the fight personal. He said Obama made it constitutional. Trump wanted applause for strength. Obama asked what strength protects. Trump wanted the country to fear his absence. Obama reminded the country it was built to survive every president. The audience stood. The applause rose slowly, then filled the room. Then Obama's line appeared on the screen again. If your strength depends on making everyone afraid of your absence, then what you are defending is not America. It is your own importance. The studio was quiet as people read it. Then the host delivered the final thought. That is why the line landed. Because democracy is not supposed to worship absence. It is supposed to survive transition. It is not supposed to be held hostage by one man's ego. It is supposed to be protected by laws, voters, service, and the shared belief that the country belongs to all of us. The applause returned. The closing montage played softly. Teachers in classrooms, workers at early morning bus stops, veterans standing at memorials, parents carrying groceries, poll workers setting up tables, firefighters raising a flag, students reading from textbooks, immigrants taking an oath, families watching election, ordinary people doing ordinary things that keep a country alive. The host spoke over the images. That is America's strength. Not one man, not one slogan, not one rally, not one grievance. America's strength is the millions of people who keep showing up, keep serving, keep arguing, keep voting, keep building, and keep believing that the country is more than the loudest voice in the room. The audience was silent. Then came the final line. Trump tried to make America feel small without him. Obama reminded the room that America was never his to measure. The applause erupted. That was the ending, not a scream, not a scandal, not a cheap insult. A contrast. Trump's politics of personal necessity met Obama's politics of shared responsibility. Trump's grievance met Obama's restraint. Trump's performance met Obama's reminder that power is borrowed, temporary, and accountable. And by the end, the old attack no longer sounded as strong. It sounded tired. Because once Obama placed the country above the man's demand for centrality looked smaller. That is why the segment stayed with viewers. It did not simply mock Trump. It measured him against the office. It asked whether his idea of strength served the country, or only magnified himself. It asked whether leadership is a performance of dominance or a discipline of responsibility. It asked whether a democracy should be made afraid of one man's absence or confident in its own endurance. Obama did not shout. He did not need to. He slowed the spectacle down, lifted the conversation above personal insult, and reminded the audience that greatness is not something a leader owns. It is something a country practices every day, through laws, through service, through restraint, through voters, through citizens who keep believing the republic is larger than one man's grievance. And under those studio lights, that reminder did more damage than any insult could have done. Because Trump wanted to be the answer, Obama made America remember it was the question.